I was 16 when my parents sat me down at our kitchen table and informed me that I needed to start paying rent. $300 a month, they said, because I was old enough to contribute to the household. I remember staring at them in disbelief, my mind racing through calculations of how I'd manage this with my part-time job at the local grocery store. But what made this moment truly devastating wasn't just the financial burden they were placing on my teenage shoulders. It was walking past my brother's room later that evening and overhearing my mother slip him his monthly allowance of $400, no questions asked, no responsibilities required. My brother was 19 at the time, 3 years older than me, but somehow still considered too young to contribute anything to our family's finances. This wasn't just about money, though the financial disparity was staggering. This was about a pattern of favoritism so deeply embedded in our family structure that I had spent years thinking it was normal. But sitting here now, 7 years later, I can see how this moment was just the beginning of understanding how systematically I had been excluded from the love and support that should have been my birthright. If you've ever felt like the family scapegoat, if you've ever wondered why your siblings seem to live by different rules, or if you've ever had to fight for basic respect in your own home, this story is for you. Because what I discovered wasn't just that my parents had different expectations for me and my brother. It was that their betrayal ran so much deeper than I could have ever imagined, and I wasn't the only family member they had systematically undermined. My name is Sarah, and I'm 28 now. I work as a financial analyst for a major consulting firm, I own my own apartment, and I've built a life that 16-year-old me could never have imagined. But the journey from that kitchen table conversation to where I am now required me to confront some painful truths about the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Growing up, I was the responsible one. My parents frequently praised me for being mature beyond my years, for helping around the house without being asked, for maintaining good grades despite working part-time jobs from the age of 15. I thought their praise meant I was valued. I thought being called responsible was a compliment. I didn't understand that in dysfunctional families, being labeled the responsible one often means being designated as the family workhorse, while others are excused from basic expectations. My brother Danny, on the other hand, was perpetually described as creative, sensitive, and needing more time to find his way. When he failed classes, my parents hired tutors. When he crashed his car, they bought him a new one. When he quit job after job, they reassured him that he just hadn't found the right fit yet. I watched this pattern for years, telling myself that maybe he really did need more support. Maybe I was just naturally more capable of handling responsibility. The rent demand at 16 was my first real glimpse into how differently we were actually being treated. $300 might not sound like much to some people, but when you're making $7 an hour working 15 hours a week, it's devastating. I was earning about $420 a month, which meant 70% of my income was going to my parents. After taxes and basic expenses like gas for my car and lunch money, I was left with almost nothing. But Danny's $400 allowance? That was just his spending money. His car insurance, gas, college expenses, and everything else were covered by my parents. I was paying them to live in my childhood bedroom while working and attending high school full-time. He was being paid to exist while contributing nothing to the household. I want to be clear about something. I didn't begrudge my brother having support. What devastated me was the realization that my parents had fundamentally different expectations for who we were supposed to become. I was expected to be self-sufficient, responsible, and contributing to the family's financial well-being as a teenager. He was expected to be supported, nurtured, and given time to figure things out well into his 20s. The financial disparity became even more apparent when it came time for college. My parents had established education savings accounts for both of us, but the way they approached funding our education revealed everything I needed to know about their priorities. Danny's college fund was protected, untouchable, and frequently supplemented when his expenses exceeded the planned amount. My fund was treated as a loan that I was expected to pay back with interest. When I questioned this arrangement, my mother explained that I was more capable of handling financial responsibility and that paying back the loan would teach me valuable lessons about money management. The logic was circular and cruel. Because I was responsible, I deserved less support. Because I was capable, I should be grateful for the opportunity to prove my capability through struggle. Danny, meanwhile, was encouraged to take his time choosing a major, to study abroad, to join expensive clubs and organizations. When he changed his major 3 times, extending his college experience from 4 years to 6, my parents celebrated his journey of self-discovery. When I worked 2 jobs to minimize my educational debt, they praised my work ethic, but never acknowledged that I was working twice as hard to achieve the same outcome. The pattern extended beyond finances. Family vacations were planned around Danny's schedule and interests. Holiday celebrations centered on his preferences. Even family photos seemed to feature him more prominently, with me often relegated to the background or asked to take the picture so I could capture everyone else together. I started keeping a mental log of these disparities, not because I was trying to build a case against my parents, but because I was trying to understand why I consistently felt like a guest in my own family. The evidence was overwhelming once I began paying attention systematically. Birthday celebrations were perhaps the most revealing example. Danny's birthdays were elaborate affairs with themes, decorations, and guest lists that he controlled entirely. My birthdays were acknowledged but rarely celebrated with the same enthusiasm. One year, when I was 21, my parents forgot my birthday entirely until Danny reminded them 3 days later. Their response was to take me out to dinner at a chain restaurant and apologize for being busy. 2 months later, they spent over $1,000 on Danny's birthday party, planning it weeks in advance. The emotional impact of these experiences was profound, but I was still operating under the assumption that families could just have different dynamics. I thought maybe I was overthinking things, maybe I was being too sensitive, maybe this was just how families functioned. I had been so conditioned to accept less that I couldn't even recognize the systematic nature of the mistreatment. Everything changed when my grandmother died during my senior year of college. Grandma Rose had been the one family member who seemed to see me clearly, who celebrated my achievements without qualification, who treated me as an individual rather than a role. Her death was devastating, but what happened afterward revealed the true extent of my family's betrayal. Grandma Rose had been wealthy, much wealthier than our family's modest lifestyle suggested. She had invested wisely, saved diligently, and built a substantial estate that she intended to leave to her grandchildren. I knew she had always spoken fondly of my work ethic and academic achievements. She had frequently told me how proud she was of my independence and determination. What I didn't know was that she had been sending money to support my education for years. Thousands of dollars that I had assumed were coming from my parents' sacrifices had actually been gifts from my grandmother, intended specifically to ensure that I wouldn't graduate with the crushing debt that so many students face. My parents had been accepting these payments and using them to cover my expenses, while allowing me to believe that I was responsible for figuring out my own financial future. I discovered this through a conversation with my grandmother's attorney during the estate settlement. He mentioned how pleased Grandma Rose had been that my parents were passing along her education support, and how she had always spoken about wanting to give me the same opportunities that Danny was receiving. His casual comment revealed a deception that had been ongoing for years. The attorney's revelation was like a crack in a dam. Once I understood that my parents had been lying about the source of my college funding, I began questioning everything else. I requested documentation of the education accounts they had established for both of us, claiming I needed the information for financial planning purposes. What I discovered was staggering. Not only had my grandmother been supplementing my education, but she had also established a trust fund specifically for my future. The trust was worth over $50,000 and was intended to be released to me upon my graduation. My parents had been managing this trust for years, using it to pay for my expenses while maintaining the fiction that I was borrowing money from them that I would need to repay. Danny's education account was exactly what they had claimed it was, a savings account that they had funded themselves. But my education was being paid for by my grandmother's generosity, while my parents took credit for supporting me and charged me interest on money that wasn't even theirs to lend. The emotional betrayal was overwhelming. I had spent years feeling guilty about the financial burden I was placing on my family, years working multiple jobs to minimize my impact on their finances, years believing that I was less deserving of support because I was more capable of handling responsibility. All while my grandmother's money was paying for my education, and my parents were treating me as if I were a financial drain. But the betrayal went even deeper. As I continued investigating, I discovered that my grandmother had left specific instructions in her will about how she wanted her estate distributed. She had designated equal amounts for both Danny and me, but she had also left detailed letters explaining her reasoning for each gift. The letter intended for me spoke about her admiration for my resilience, her pride in my achievements, and her hope that her gift would provide me with security and opportunities. I never received that letter. My parents had decided that I didn't need to know about my grandmother's specific intentions, and they had been managing her final gifts as if they were their own money to distribute according to their judgment. They had essentially stolen my grandmother's final words to me, words that would have provided comfort during one of the most difficult periods of my life. The discovery of my grandmother's true intentions forced me to confront the systematic nature of my family's treatment. This wasn't just about different parenting styles or varying expectations. This was about deception, manipulation, and the systematic undermining of my relationship with the one family member who had consistently treated me with respect and equality. I was 22 when I finally confronted my parents about what I had discovered. I had prepared for months, gathering documentation, consulting with the attorney, and building an undeniable case. I thought that presenting them with evidence would lead to acknowledgement, apology, and perhaps some explanation for their behavior. Instead, they became defensive and accusatory. My mother insisted that they had been protecting me from the burden of managing my grandmother's gifts, that they had been teaching me important lessons about self-reliance, and that I was being ungrateful for their guidance. My father was more direct, stating that they had made decisions they thought were best for my character development, and that my grandmother had been too indulgent. The conversation revealed something crucial about how they viewed me. In their minds, I was supposed to be grateful for being treated as less deserving of support. I was supposed to appreciate being given more responsibility and fewer resources. I was supposed to understand that their deception had been for my own good, that learning to struggle would make me a stronger person. But what about Danny? When I asked why he wasn't being taught these same valuable lessons about self-reliance, they explained that he was different, that he needed more support, that his sensitive nature required different treatment. The circular logic was maddening. I was strong enough to handle being treated poorly, so I deserved poor treatment. He was sensitive enough to need support, so he deserved support. The confrontation ended with my parents demanding that I apologize for questioning their judgment and threatening to cut off all contact if I continued to be disrespectful. They positioned themselves as the victims of my unreasonable expectations, as parents who had sacrificed for their children only to be met with ingratitude and accusations. This response was actually a gift, though I didn't recognize it at the time. Their refusal to acknowledge the reality of their behavior, their insistence that I was the problem, and their threat to abandon me if I didn't submit to their narrative finally freed me from the need to maintain the relationship at any cost. I began setting boundaries immediately. I stopped accepting their money, stopped asking for their advice, and stopped pretending that our family dynamics were normal. I used my grandmother's trust fund to establish my own financial independence and began building a life that didn't depend on their approval or support. The changes were remarkable. Without the constant stress of trying to earn their equal treatment, I was able to focus on my career and personal growth. I started therapy to process the years of systematic emotional abuse and to develop healthier relationship patterns. I began surrounding myself with people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could provide or how much responsibility I could handle. But the most significant change was in how I viewed myself. I had spent years believing that I was difficult, demanding, and ungrateful. I had internalized their message that I was lucky to receive any support at all, that I should be grateful for the opportunity to prove myself through struggle. Therapy helped me understand that these beliefs were the result of manipulation, not reality. The vindication came 2 years later when Danny, now 25, was still living at home and receiving his monthly allowance. My parents had begun hinting that they were concerned about his lack of direction and wondering if they had been too supportive. They never connected their concerns about his failure to launch with their systematic undermining of my development, but the irony wasn't lost on me. Around this time, I received recognition at work that brought some public attention to my achievements. A major project I had led resulted in significant cost savings for one of our biggest clients, and the consulting firm featured my work in their annual report. The recognition included a substantial bonus and a promotion that placed me among the youngest senior analysts in the company's history. My parents' reaction to this success was telling. They were proud, they said, but also surprised that I had achieved so much so quickly. They seemed to have forgotten that I had been demonstrating competence and responsibility since I was a teenager, that I had been managing financial and emotional challenges that they had never asked Danny to handle. The public recognition of my professional success also brought attention to my personal story. I had begun writing about family dynamics and financial therapy, sharing insights about how childhood experiences shape adult relationships with money and responsibility. My writing resonated with many people who had experienced similar family patterns, and I began receiving messages from others who had been designated as the responsible child while their siblings were coddled and supported. These conversations revealed something crucial. My experience wasn't unique. Many families operate with similar dynamics, designating one child as the responsible one who doesn't need support and another as the sensitive one who requires special treatment. The responsible child is often praised for their maturity while being systematically denied the resources and support given to other family members. The pattern is insidious because it's disguised as positive recognition. Being called mature, responsible, and capable sounds like praise, but in dysfunctional families, these labels often mean that the child is expected to function as an adult while still being treated as subordinate to parental authority. 6 months after my professional recognition, my parents reached out to me with an unusual request. They wanted to borrow money to help Danny with a business venture he was pursuing. The irony was staggering. They were asking me, the child they had charged rent as a teenager, to financially support the child they had given allowances to well into his 20s. I declined their request, not out of spite, but because I had learned that enabling their dysfunctional patterns wouldn't help anyone. I explained that I wasn't comfortable lending money to family members and suggested that Danny might benefit from the same lessons about self-reliance that they had been so eager to teach me. Their response was predictable. I was being selfish, ungrateful, and cruel. I was punishing Danny for their parenting decisions, and I was letting pride interfere with family loyalty. The conversation revealed that they still didn't understand the fundamental inequality in how they had treated us, and they still expected me to be grateful for the opportunity to prove my worth through struggle. This interaction crystallized something important for me. I realized that I had been hoping for acknowledgement, apology, and change that was never going to come. My parents were invested in maintaining their narrative that their differential treatment had been appropriate and beneficial. They needed to believe that their favoritism had been justified, that their deception had been protective, and that my success was evidence that their methods had worked. But I no longer needed their acknowledgement to know my worth. I had built a life that reflected my values, surrounded myself with people who treated me with respect, and developed a career that utilized my skills and compensated me fairly. Their opinion of my choices was no longer relevant to my sense of self. The boundary setting that followed was both challenging and liberating. I established clear limits on our interactions, declining to participate in family dynamics that replicated the old patterns. I stopped trying to earn their equal treatment and started treating myself with the respect they had never shown me. This meant saying no to requests that would put me in the position of being the responsible one who fixes everyone else's problems. It meant refusing to participate in conversations that centered on Danny's needs while dismissing my own. It meant declining to pretend that our family history was normal or that their behavior had been acceptable. The most difficult part of this process was accepting that setting boundaries might mean losing the relationship entirely. My parents had made it clear that they would only maintain contact if I returned to the old dynamics, if I accepted their version of reality, and if I was grateful for their treatment. I had to decide whether maintaining the relationship was worth sacrificing my own well-being and self-respect. I chose myself. For the first time in my life, I prioritized my own needs and feelings over my family's demands. I stopped trying to fix what was wrong with our relationships and started focusing on building healthy relationships with people who valued me appropriately. The therapy process that supported this transition was crucial. I worked with a therapist who specialized in family systems and childhood emotional abuse. Together, we unpacked the ways that my family's treatment had shaped my beliefs about myself, my expectations for relationships, and my patterns of people-pleasing and over-responsibility. I learned that children who are designated as the responsible one often develop what's called a parentified role within the family system. They take on adult responsibilities and emotional burdens that aren't appropriate for their developmental stage, while simultaneously being denied the support and nurturing that children need. This creates adults who are highly capable but struggle with self-worth, who can manage everyone else's needs but have difficulty identifying their own. The healing process involved learning to recognize my own needs, to ask for support when appropriate, and to distinguish between healthy responsibility and the over-functioning that had been expected of me. I had to practice saying no without guilt, setting boundaries without explanation, and prioritizing my own well-being without feeling selfish. Today, my relationship with my parents is minimal and carefully managed. They occasionally reach out when they need something, but they've largely given up trying to pull me back into the old patterns. Danny and I have no relationship, which is sad but necessary. He never developed the skills to function independently, and our parents' enabling has left him unprepared for adult responsibilities. I've built a chosen family of friends and colleagues who treat me with the respect and support that I never received from my biological family. I've learned to recognize healthy relationship patterns and to surround myself with people who value reciprocity, honesty, and mutual respect. My career has continued to flourish. I've been promoted twice more since that initial recognition, and I now lead a team of analysts who work on some of the firm's most complex projects. I've also begun speaking and writing about family financial dynamics, helping others recognize and address similar patterns in their own families. The work I do now with families and individuals dealing with money-related dysfunction has shown me how common these patterns are. I regularly work with adults who were charged rent as teenagers while their siblings received allowances, who were expected to pay for their own education while their siblings' expenses were covered, who were praised for their responsibility while being systematically denied the support they needed. These patterns often persist across generations. Parents who were treated as the responsible child often struggle with either replicating the same dynamics with their own children or overcompensating in ways that create new problems. Breaking these cycles requires conscious effort, therapeutic support, and a willingness to prioritize children's actual needs over family mythology. The financial aspect of these dynamics is particularly damaging because money represents both practical support and emotional value. When parents treat children's financial needs differently, they're communicating different levels of worth and investment. Children internalize these messages and carry them into adulthood, often struggling with self-worth and financial anxiety, even when they become financially successful. I want to be clear that I'm not advocating for treating all children exactly the same. Children have different needs, different developmental timelines, and different support requirements. The problem isn't different treatment. It's systematically unfair treatment that's justified through manipulation and gaslighting. Healthy families adjust their support based on children's actual needs, but they don't create fundamental inequalities in value and investment. They don't charge one child rent while giving another child allowances. They don't require one child to earn support while freely giving support to another child. The recovery process from this kind of family dysfunction is ongoing. I still sometimes catch myself over-functioning in relationships, still sometimes struggle with asking for help, still sometimes default to proving my worth through productivity and achievement. But I've learned to recognize these patterns and to consciously choose healthier responses. I've also learned the importance of validating others who've experienced similar treatment. When someone shares a story about family financial inequality or systematic favoritism, I believe them. I don't minimize their experience or suggest that their parents meant well. I understand that well-meaning parents can still cause significant harm through their actions and choices. The transformation from the 16-year-old who accepted that paying rent was reasonable to the adult who recognizes that treatment as inappropriate has been profound. It required me to question fundamental assumptions about family, fairness, and my own worth. It required me to choose my own well-being over family harmony and to prioritize truth over comfortable lies. But this transformation has also been incredibly rewarding. I've built a life that reflects my values, developed relationships based on mutual respect, and found meaningful work that helps others navigate similar challenges. I've learned that self-worth isn't earned through sacrifice and struggle. It's inherent and should be honored by the people who claim to love us. If you're reading this and recognizing patterns from your own family, I want you to know that you're not alone. Your experiences are valid, your feelings are justified, and your worth isn't determined by how much responsibility you can handle or how little support you need. You deserve to be treated with the same respect and investment that other family members receive. You deserve to have your needs recognized and supported. You deserve relationships that honor your inherent worth rather than requiring you to prove it through constant struggle. The journey toward healing isn't easy, but it's possible. It requires courage to question family narratives, strength to set boundaries, and patience to build new patterns. But the freedom that comes from living authentically, from being valued appropriately, and from choosing your own path is worth every difficult step. I'd love to hear from others who've experienced similar family dynamics. Have you been the responsible child while your siblings were coddled? Have you discovered family financial deception? Have you had to choose between family harmony and your own well-being? Share your story in the comments below, and let's build a community of people who understand what it means to reclaim your worth after family betrayal. Remember to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more content about healing from family dysfunction and building healthier relationships. Your story matters, your experiences are valid, and your worth is not negotiable.